I think a lot of times it's very easy to overcomplicate marketing and growth. At
Right.
the end of the day, you need to constantly be going through an evaluation process of who are my customers, where are they spending time, what are they doing in those places? And then the last question is, okay, how do I participate in that?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Evergrow Show. And today's guest is somebody that I've looked up to pretty much my entire career, and somebody who has actually given me a lot of the foundation that I have as a marketer. We have Brian Balfour, former VP of Growth at HubSpot, amazing entrepreneur, and founder and CEO of Reforge, which is a program for marketers to learn the fundamentals and just to get an overall amazing understanding of what growth really is. So, Brian, super excited to have you here with us.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
I would love to ask you kind of an open-ended question, but would love to get your thoughts on what are some of the things that you're extremely excited about right now as it pertains to growth and marketing?
Yeah. Um, I think oftentimes I think there's like two sides to every coin. So in this example, I think the things that I'm most excited about probably also create the most anxiety at the same
That
time.
was going to be a follow-up question, actually, but yeah, would love
Right.
to get your take.
Right. Yeah. Oftentimes the answer is the same. There's just like two different lenses on the equation. I think that there's so much change, underlying technological change, which is leading to changes in how our customers, how we, and if you're a business, your customers are spending their time, where they're spending their time, how they're spending their time in those places. And ultimately, what that leads to is essentially two things: lots of opportunity, also lots of risk. That's kind of the two sides of both of those coins. When there is a lot of change and there is a lot of disruption, what that typically means from a growth and marketing perspective is that for those that, um, are really aggressive and they try new things and they take a lot of bets and stuff, there's a lot of opportunity to find new arbitrage opportunities, things that haven't been saturated, haven't been used a million times, aren't being, overfunded and crowded out by folks that have tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, like all those types of things. And I think that all of that change creates these windows of opportunity for like the underdogs, the small guys who like I personally like to root for. That's where I've spent most of my life is in early stage startups. But the flip side of that is that things are changing so fast that it just feels like we're kind of operating on quicksand. That's what my podcast co-host and his name's Fareed Masavat, have called it. And that has a lot of negative aspects to it. This feeling that like you're constantly on a hamster wheel, not really knowing, you know, all the things that you're spending energy on going to pay off. Well, by the way, you can only you don't have unlimited energy and time. You have to pick and choose, and some things are going to be right, some things are going to be wrong, like just all of these types of things. And so, anyways, it's simultaneously can be the most exciting and toughest environment that I have ever operated in. And I think that switch flips on a daily basis for me.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, if we as marketers thought that shiny object syndrome used to be bad back in the day, now it's every 5 minutes something new launches, another game changer, another, totally flip your business upside down for better or for worse. And so it is a kind of a game of, first of all, playing catch up and figuring out what are the things that I should be using and testing, and what are some of the things that could actually change the trajectory of my business. But I feel like there are also a ton of distractions, and of course you have kind of two cohorts of people. One is fundamentals and first principles, they always apply. And I feel like that's a lot of what Reforge teaches marketers, right? There are absolutely fundamentals that you should operate and leverage, and effectively those are going to be the things that are really the building blocks of your business. And then there's also the camp of like, no, I just need one more tool, I just need one more thing, and that's going to make the huge difference. And so I think in today's day and age, especially for the last few years, it's been really, really hard to, kind of separate the signal from the noise. But in
Mhm.
regards to, some of the opportunities, what are some of those big opportunities that you're currently seeing in the market right now?
Yeah, and just before I answer that question, just kind of bridge kind of what you said and I said is to that fundamental framework is that I think what people feel right now is that the end tactic, the end to do thing is changing incredibly fast. And that just kind of goes through the natural life cycle of a tactic of not working to working to being saturated in a much shorter period of time. But kind of what I was kind of relating back to is that I think a lot of times it's very easy to overcomplicate marketing and growth. At the end of the day, you need to constantly be going through an evaluation process of who are my customers, where are they spending time, what are they doing in those places? And then the last question is, okay, how do I participate in that? And there's really only three ways to participate. You can either build something into that environment. Building is meaning either like a product integration or building content, to participate in that environment. You can buy, which is typically the form of ads, right? As an example, or you can partner. Those are kind of like the three things. A tactic is just basically a compressed expression of all of those types of things. But when you feel like something's not working, you just have to go revisit the fundamentals and re-ask those questions again, right? Kind of go through that process and in all of those types of pieces. So to kind of get to your question of like the largest opportunities that I think are emerging, it's basically anywhere that so this answer will be different depending on your product and who your audience is. For everybody, or I would say 90% plus of folks, right? The behavior, there's just this massive behavior and time shift going on over to these, the broad-based chat-based experiences. ChatGPT number one, Claude and Gemini kind of as somewhat of a equal number two, a very distant number two, and then a bunch of other folks. And so I think within those environments, especially ChatGPT, the one that I've been talking about the most, because I think it's going to hit everybody the fastest, is essentially this massive distribution shift. Everybody's kind of focused on AEO, SEO. And I agree, like that's still an opportunity. We're kind of still in the dark ages on that one. Everybody's kind of still figuring it out. People started to learn how to game Reddit because Reddit was being cited a lot, but that's going to go away. Like all those types of things, like that game's going to be constantly changing. Of course, the new one that they announced maybe a month, two ago now, I don't even remember the time frame, is essentially ChatGPT apps. And so back to that question of like build by partner, that is a new way to build into that channel where a huge portion of our audience's time is shifted to. And so I think that's going to create lots of opportunity. Right now, it's still a very closed system. Unless you're in their preferred partnership program, you can pretty much only develop and build things locally. But they're planning on opening up towards end of year. And I think once they get there, they will push it extremely aggressively because it will attract more users, more usage, more memory, more context to their platform, which increases defensibility. But it's going to open up a whole new set of opportunities as well. And then I think on top of that, like I think in smaller environments, right, depending on your target audience, you kind of see these behaviors shifting too. Developers, for example, huge portions of their time now spend time in a new platform and surface area of Cursor. If you target developers, that platform, that area could present a new opportunity for you to like build buyer partner in some way, shape, or form as they kind of open up their platform and stuff. And I think that answer will depend on, once again, like who your audience is. But at the end of the day, like the places where I'm spending most of my attention to are, you can like essentially think about it like as a stream, and the stream has started to fork where, like part of the water is starting to be siphoned off to the sides of this new area. And I'm just like, I'm following where the forks are in this river where it's like where the water is like starting to, the new places where the water's starting to flow, because those once again, I think your customers kind of lead the way and wherever their behaviors are shifting is kind of where you need to spend time. And now the hard part of this game is where I'll wrap up is there's always this game of, okay, well, the earlier I take the bet, on a new channel or something like that, risk, the higher risk reward, but also the higher long time frame it might take to get to that reward. So there's always this sort of where do I put my chips type of equation versus like if I spend too many of my chips on old things that are in decline, right? Like that's like a different battle. And the answer of like how you allocate your chips will once again just depend on where you're at as a business, who your audience is, how fast they're changing, like all of those different factors.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned AEO, GEO, there's a bunch of different names for it, but as of today, yeah, there's a pretty simple formula. You get your content out on Reddit and it indexes Reddit,
Hmm.
and it pulls it up and it references that in its queries. But it's funny, just like with SEO, you remember back in the day, we used to link stuff, we used to keyword stuff, we used to
Totally.
do all of these things that technically they worked, but then, in one fell swoop, the algorithm changes and all of a sudden that one tactic, that one hack doesn't work. But actually, ironically enough, the same things that always applied for SEO, so great link building, amazing content, things that are indexable, consumable, easy to understand, websites loading fast for a better user experience, these fundamentals still apply to AEO, GEO. And so I think, as marketers, there's definitely this delicate balance of we're always changing the tactic that we know is working right now, but I think over-reliance on those things is potentially one of those pitfalls, right? Where if we're not nailing the fundamentals, where we think like, oh, if we just get all of our content linked from Reddit, and if we just game, the system on Reddit and create a bunch of accounts and, answer each other's queries and then link our products, then it's going to work. But, again, in one fell swoop, that game can change. And unless you've nailed that fundamental baseline of doing things well and actually adding value with your content, it could totally shift. And I also love the point that you brought up about distribution channels. So OpenAI potentially being one of those super apps, right, where everybody's getting the distribution through their platform. Amazon became that in the world of e-commerce, right? Now, if you're selling products online and your products aren't on Amazon, well, you're missing out on this huge portion of potential customers, this huge discovery channel that could surface your products. And I think we're actually entering this world of the super app. And Apple recently announced that they're going to have these mini apps integrated within existing
Yes.
apps.
Yeah.
It's so hard to get somebody to download a new app these days. I mean, I have, 15 screens full of apps that I've downloaded over the years, and there is so much convincing that somebody needs to do to get me to download and onboard into something new. But if I can just use an existing distribution channel, very similar to kind of how WeChat, right, does it in Asia, where they just have all of these different apps inside of it. They have e-commerce apps and food ordering apps, but it's all kind of in this one mega app environment. I think we're entering that similar era in the West, and I think that's actually a really good call on your part. I really see that we're going to evolve in that direction.
Yeah. Part of the tough mentality on all these things is almost always at the beginning. It for a lot of folks, it doesn't make sense to them to actually like play the game and participate. So going back to your example, Amazon and e-commerce, right? Like a couple of my investors were, e-commerce store owners, they open up the ad platform. There was very much of this mentality of like, and screw Amazon. I want to go direct to my customers. I don't want to give them a cut and pay for ads and like all that kind of stuff. And similarly, I think in ChatGPT apps, there's a little bit of this mentality of like, I know they're taking a bunch of my consumers' time and attention away. Why do I want to potentially even like help that more, right? And participate in that channel. I think unfortunately at the end of the day, there are some forces that are inevitable, right? It was inevitable that Amazon was going to have a huge ad business and that was going to be a huge channel for them, and that they were just the flywheel effect of aggregating more and more consumer purchases was going to keep on spinning. And I think the same is true, in my personal opinion, for ChatGPT that they will continue to accrue most of the consumer usage and like time that's spent. And so I would, when I talk to people about this and they kind of bring up that stuff, it's like, look, like if you just think it's inevitable, then it's better to play early than to play late. And so you kind of have to assess what you think are the, inevitable like flywheels that are just going to continue to compound and become a force that you have to participate with. And
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's a reason that "if you can't beat them, join them," right, exists. It's true, and I think, it's placing those bets. Obviously, we spend a portion of our time going against the grain, as they say, zig when others zag, right? Testing, trying something different. But I think, like you said, if you see some of these inevitable patterns forming, trying to counteract where the world is going, I think is just probably not the wisest move, unless you've got some informational advantage or something else that, you think is kind of a guaranteed hit. It doesn't hurt to position your business for success. And very, very long time ago, a smart person in my life told me the goal of every business is to be easier to do business with. And so if you're not showing up where your customers are potentially searching for you or searching for information, then you're doing yourself a disservice. So yeah,
yeah,
absolutely agreed.
those zag when everybody else is zigging bets. So yeah, you're right. Like that is the other side of the coin. And I find those equally important, right? Like that's Brian Halligan, the CEO of HubSpot, talks about this all the time. And I lived through it, which was everybody at, when I worked there, which was 10 years ago now, yeah, gosh, a little longer than that, started there 12 and a half, 13 years ago now. Everybody always constantly was like, when are you going to go up to the enterprise? When are you going to go up to the enterprise? Because that's exactly what everybody else was doing. And Halligan and Darmesh were very smart to say, actually, we're going to stay in we're going to stay in this mid-market. As everybody moves to the enterprise, we think they're going to open up this gaping hole. So as I talk out loud, I'm trying to think through, okay, when does that actually make sense? And I think the conviction in that specific example that Halligan and Darmesh got to was that was like, no, like actually the mid market has tons of companies, and they essentially they took a bet that there was opportunity there, like the market was there, and that was like a growing market and an even faster growing market as people exited that segment of the market, and they basically took a bet that they could find a way to make like the retention and all that stuff figure out, right? So the opportunity, like that the reverse opportunity has to be like certainly has to be there. Similarly with Reforge at the beginning, 10 years ago when we started Reforge, nobody was doing 8-week long, super intensive, expert led, mixture of live on demand courses. Almost nobody was doing that.
Right.
Like also like high pricing it, making it through an application. Like we did a lot of zagging while everybody else was zigging. At that time, it was like the low priced, massively online, courses, right? And so, we really did the opposite then. So anyways, as I talk through it, it is tricky. Like just some things are forces that are much greater than you that you just have to participate in. And there's these other set of choices where actually doing the opposite is also make or break.
Absolutely. And I think there's also a part of, I guess, making those decisions is having a long-term versus a short-term mentality. Like if you think about it, HubSpot placed the bet that this was going to be a growing market. Every business needs a CRM. Every business needs good tools to communicate with their customers and keep the information organized. This isn't just exclusively a need of enterprises. Everybody's going to need this. But also in the sense, if you look at the larger competitors in the market when HubSpot was coming around, Salesforce, it's a very, very clunky, heavy, high touch tool that you really need to customize, and you need to, it created its own segment basically of folks that came into organizations just to set up Salesforce instances. And HubSpot said, well, no, everybody needs a CRM, but also these things need to be like easy to use. They need to be easy to understand. They need to be user friendly. And so basically that big bet was placed on this is going to grow as far as a customer segment, and we are going to grow with them. And like you said, so many of those mid-market companies ended up scaling into enterprises, and HubSpot ended up scaling with them. Same thing, SMBs ended up scaling into mid-market companies and growing even further than that. I almost think about it like when Apple put computers into all of the schools. You know, what a long-term bet. If we just put our computers into students' hands, they're going to grow up learning how to use our technology. They're going to use our interfaces, which are so fundamentally different from Windows that when they enter the workforce, they're going to make an obvious choice. They're going to stick with the thing that they're familiar with, which, you know, I think capturing people into an ecosystem is crazy to think about as a long-term bet. But you really need to be able to balance short-term growth with that long-term thinking. Also crazy to think how long ago the first cohort of Reforge was.
I know. I know. It's both like it feels crazy, but also we look back and to your point, all of the same foundational principles that we taught 10 years ago still apply today. It's just that there's a new set of ingredients to work with. Like the frameworks and the principles are kind of like your tool set, or like if you're more into a chef analogy, it's your pots, your pans, your spatulas, like all that kind of stuff. And what AI has really opened up is like this whole new cabinet, this whole new refrigerator of ingredients we didn't really have before or knew existed. And so all of a sudden now the tools are the same, but we are all of a sudden can create whole new meals out of what's available to us.
Absolutely. Actually, a perfect segue into, I think, a pretty interesting question. If you were joining HubSpot today, and it was at the stage of growth that you joined it at, but you had all of the knowledge and the experience that you have today, as well as access to all of these new tool sets and, you know, AI in general, is there anything that you would have done differently, or how would you approach HubSpot's growth today, given everything that you've learned since, you know, your experience there?
I think it's a totally different challenge that they have today than when I was there. So when I was there, the core challenge, we had one product, the marketing product. It was a very sales and marketing led heavy machine. And the whole bet was, this machine's cranking. But if we look 5 years out from now and project out, like we want to continue to grow 50% year over year between now and 5 years later, what do those numbers look like? Like what has to be true for us to hit there? Can we actually get there on the current machine we have? If so, we should just like focus more, pour more fuel into optimize. But very quickly came to the answer of like, no, like we've got to like layer new things on. And those two layers that was first multi-product. So going from the marketing product to the sales hub to the CRM, and then eventually the service hub, and they've added a bunch of other hubs afterwards. And starting to activate and layer on a more product-led growth motion. Those were like kind of the two big things that there were some other smaller bets on that, like international expansion and those types of things. But those two things were kind of the foundational things that really created compounding returns for essentially the past 10 years. The problem now, just to be clear, I'm still very supportive of HubSpot. I don't really know most of the executive team that's there anymore. Like most of the folks that I worked with, I don't know the CEO. I don't have any inside knowledge. I just want to put all those disclaimers
Right.
out
Good
there.
context. Yeah.
It's an amazing company, like just like unbelievable what they've been able to accomplish. But I think the challenge is totally different at this point. The challenge right now is kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, is that customers are not only their customers and their target audience are not only shifting a huge part of their time and behavior chat to new places. So that hits from on a distribution level, but it also hits the core product. And you can see this in the sense of every single one of their core verticals, from CRM to marketing automation, to sales and other things, is they're being attacked essentially by all sorts of these new like AI native startups, as well as a whole new crop of folks that want to operate in a different way. So in the same way that Atlassian has a later stage problem in the sense that if you talk to most startups, almost none of them start on Jira or Confluence these days. All right. They're starting on Linear and Notion. So those starting points, so to your point, Apple going really early to education, having people grow up, Atlassian has that problem. And that's why they've been so acquisitive with things like Loom and other things, right? I think HubSpot has that emerging problem. It's not a, but I'm seeing like in early stage startups, kind of those they want something different. They're making different choices, and as a result, it's like somehow HubSpot needs to solve that, not just for one product, but across the portfolio. And so that's both, once again, to the two sides of the coin, the challenge and the opportunity. So like that is a really hard freaking problem. I think the second part of this is that, and we can kind of think about this on both sides, which is I think it used to make sense when you thought about, if you just look at building a growth motion and your tool adoption internally, what people used to do pre-AI is that they would, they're like, I'm going to choose my email tool and my social tool and then my CMS. They're kind of like working from the edges. And then when they selected those, then they would be like, okay, what data do I need to sync to those tools to try to make them valuable? So they work kind of from this outside in to the data, like in that direction. And I have this giant hypothesis, and why I think tools like Clay and AirOps are very well positioned for things is that in AI, you actually want to go in the reverse direction. You actually want to go from the data out. And so tools like Clay, which allow you, it's basically the core of it is this interface that lets you mold the data that you want. They are going to be very well positioned to just layer on all of the downstream marketing activities. And I think Clay recently launched things like being able to send emails directly from their tools, like things like that. And
Landing
so,
page personalization. Yeah, all of these. You're
right,
seeing that evolution happen in real time for
right,
sure.
right. And the same thing is like with AirOps is that they kind of treat your content like data. And you're like molding a lot of the data at the center and then working out. So they've been labeled like an AEO tool, but I think that's just probably a good hook for them into the market right now. And I think there's much longer potential. And so I think the tools that where people are spending time molding the data and all those types of things in an AI native world will have much larger opportunity, because that's certainly how I find how we're working, right? We start with the data and all those things, and then we're asking, based on that, what can we enable with AI? Like what type of personalized messages, what type of intent targeting, like all of that type of stuff. We think in that way. We don't think from the outside in. And so so that's also a big that's also a big challenge. So anyways, I think the problems are just so different at this point from kind of what we did during my time, is that there's a lot of like how do you disrupt within at HubSpot kind of questions. And I think not just HubSpot, but a lot of other companies are dealing with that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's such an interesting point, the sort of data first approach. It's also interesting. I mean, obviously there are companies that have existed for long periods of time and that have amassed a lot of data. Some of it is very useful, some of it is completely useless because it's disorganized. And I think having data organized in a meaningful way that can then feed into all of your other activities is actually a huge advantage in this sort of AI first landscape.
Well, it's an advantage and disadvantage. Like just because
Sure.
you have a lot of the data doesn't mean it's in a useful format. And so
Right.
it's almost to the extent that the companies that have more data, the task to get it into a useful place for AI is a much larger task. I would also say that I don't think AI is enabled using new types of data in ways that companies were not capturing before. So to give you this, so I have some friends, early stage startups building from scratch. Just to give you a couple examples, a couple of them are, like they're recording every single meeting unless it's a one-on-one performance review, or in dumping it into a central repository, or they have individual engineers as they go through work. They have dedicated Slack channels to each individual to basically type their thinking out loud, or like how they're solving those things. Now, why would you do those two things? Well, actually, AI can actually make use of that information. So that those same friends, what they're doing is, so when they're not pumping all of that into some AI tooling. And so now, like when a new engineer onboards and says, okay, like why was X implemented in this way, or right, like all that kind of stuff, there's AI literally has access to that log of
Mhm.
context, like all of those types of things. And to do that, just to do those two small things, imagine doing that at like a scale of a 5,000 person company. It
Right.
would be so hard. It would be so like just so so there's new types of data to make both company operations and growth incredibly useful that I think are going that the larger you are, the harder it is to like put into place at this point. So once again, like there's two sides of this coin, and depending on where you're sitting, you can kind of use them in different ways.
Totally, and it's also funny, I feel like that's, to me, almost always held true. When I started working with a new company, I would almost always prefer to come in and build from scratch rather than to take over existing
We all love
infrastructure.
clean slates. We
Yeah,
all love
I
clean
mean,
slates. Yeah.
if you think about tracking pixels, if you think about just the way things are built, you come in, you look at it, you're like, Why would that ever be the case?" And so, yeah, I do agree that I think having more data isn't necessarily an advantage. I think being able to organize and utilize that data in meaningful ways. I mean, one of the things that I've been doing a lot, as a marketer over the last like several decades, I've amassed all of these info products, right? Like PDFs and just useful resources and all of these things that have
Mhm.
helped me learn. And I've spent so much time consuming them. I've actually just been dumping a ton of those into like a notebook LM or something, and then being able to query those in real time as opposed to like having to go into my Google Drive and find that thing from years ago and like reference back. And so I feel like it really does enable people to be more efficient with sorting through data, but only if that data is meaningfully organized and fed into it in a way that can give it the context. And I love the use case for the engineers. So many times, I'm not a very technical person, but so many time engineers that I know, they look through code, they're like, why would they build this like this?
Yeah, of
What were
course.
they thinking that made them think that this was a good idea? And now having that context is like, "Oh, cool, there's a knowledge gap that I could have never filled before."
Yeah, I do that, and then I find an old Notion doc to realize that it was my own dumb decision and not somebody else's.
Yeah, totally. Well, I would love to shift. I mean, we talked a lot about kind of some of the opportunities that AI is presenting, but I would love to come back to some of those fears or some of those pitfalls that you're seeing. How is potentially this new technological shift affecting the landscape negatively, or what could be some of those things, traps that businesses or founders or marketers can get stuck in that AI is almost making worse?
Well, I think that it's much harder. I kind of frame this as, from a marketing perspective, especially if you're early stage, it's so hard to, so on on both sides of the coin, once again, if you're first to market with something and a value prop, it actually tends to be easier to escape velocity. Activating this like kind of brand flywheel, and is where, ends up, and for some reason ends up getting activated much, much quicker because things are spreading much faster. And you can certainly see this with, the cursors of the world or like the lovables of the world and stuff. But that doesn't mean that those are the best products for a given audience or a given use case. And so, if you're a lucky one of those few who are able to activate it, great. If you weren't, the job is 10 times harder. Hitting escape velocity is 10 times harder. And there's a few different reasons for this. I think one is just from, the competitive angles, as you're not only competing against incumbents, you often tend to be competing with this, you know, why is this better than me doing this in ChatGPT, like in a lot of cases. And you're also just dealing with, there's dozens of early stage startups in every single category with multiple new ones being pumped out and, every single YC cohort. So that's a big part of it, and we're also in this. We're in the middle of this shift of behavior change, meaning, let's say I'm a startup And I'm like, okay, I'm going to play where the incumbents aren't playing. I'm going to take, let's say I was just going to take 100% bet on a distribution channel of ChatGPT apps, and I'm going to be the first to there and all that kind of stuff. Well, your speed of escape velocity is fundamentally limited by by other factors outside of your control that have to do with that channel and how fast your audience is adopting that channel and all that kind of stuff. And over the long term, that actually might be the right bet, but in the short term, there's this intense pressure of I've got to be one of those stories of 0 to 100 million in 6 months.
Right.
Like how do I freaking do that? Right? So just finding the white space for a lot of folks is so much harder. It's so much harder right now. And I think that, it can definitely be quite exhausting. I think the other part is that, with the capabilities of the underlying models, they continue to double every 7 months. I think that's kind of the stat. And certainly that seems like that can continue to go with the latest releases of Opus 4.5 and Gemini 3. I'm forgetting all the model names, right?
Yeah.
But you know, as long as that continues, I think every time the model capabilities double, they sort of enable whole new use cases, whole new things, and can either destroy or enable a product market fit. So this timing window is so incredibly tight, right? So like there were folks who tried the whole vibe coding types of applications before whatever the Sonnet model was like late last year that really enabled it. It just so happened, that Lovable and a couple others had just landed right around like this like plus or two minus month window
Yeah.
around that fundamentally new capability. And now, they're riding that curve. So just these once again, just finding these windows is both from a timing perspective and white space perspective. Oh my gosh, it's a really hard game right now. A really hard game. In general, like all of just the general noise and how do you find a sharp wedge through that noise, like all that type of stuff. I think a tactic that everybody's probably very aware of if you're on X or LinkedIn right now is like every product launch with these cool new kind of launch videos. And we started doing them too, but we're already, month in, we're already starting to see those fatigue.
Right.
So like, it's just like the window of this stuff is just it's so incredibly tight. And like I said, it makes you feel like you're on this never ending hamster wheel.
Totally. And it's crazy how, right place, right time becomes that much more increasingly important. And it's interesting to your point of, picking a distribution channel like building on top of OpenAI as a platform. You've seen kind of companies, let's just take Zynga, for example, right? They said, okay, Facebook is our distribution channel and this is going to help us scale. And they really rode this crazy wave. But then at a certain point, you're very much so dependent on that platform not to throttle you. Or in the example of Amazon, you have this amazing distribution channel and you're getting all of this awareness and you're getting all these sales. But then Amazon goes and just like makes a cheaper version of your product using all of the specifications and all the data that they've collected. And now all of a sudden, they're ranking their product first before yours, and you're losing sales and they're cannibalizing the exact thing that you were depending on to grow your business. So there's also this kind of risk of like, yes, I need to take a bet on a channel, and yes, I need to take advantage of an opportunity that exists, but I can't put all of my eggs in that basket because there's a high potential for a company to just deprecate some features that I really depend on, or to, potentially replace my solution with a home baked solution of their own and then merchandise that on top, to more people. So yeah, it really is this like, very, very risky time in business to definitely make decisions that could make or break the future of your company, but then be able to diversify just enough so that, you don't just get shut down overnight like we've seen happen in the past.
Yeah. So those who own the distribution and attention of like the end consumer will 100% throttle you at some point in some way, shape, or form. They'll levy a
Absolutely.
tax like Apple does. They'll artificially suppress organic to push you towards ads like LinkedIn has been doing recently, or they'll just absorb your use cases. They will do one of those three things, like no doubt, right?
Yeah,
And I think that's also why it is especially tricky right now to be building on top of OpenAI and Claude, because not only are you building on top of their foundational models, but they decide that your use case, because they also own the time and the attention of the consumers, the end consumers, that your use case is something that they want to throttle in some way, shape, or form to monetize. Like OpenAI has to find ways to get to that $1 trillion of commitments or whatever they have in hardware.
get to break even.
That whatever that huge number is,
Yeah,
they will find it. And that's what the history of all of these distribution channel shifts and all these platforms is told. But the thing is like, just because you know that's going to exist doesn't mean you shouldn't play the game. That's the
of
prisoner's
course.
dilemma. Your job number one right now is just to catch the wave, catch a wave, right? Like catch the wave. And the moment that you catch a wave and you can like really feel that momentum behind you, then you get the opportunity. It's an opportunity to think about the next question of like, okay, how do I de-risk from that? Do I need to build deeper workflow? Can I accrue some type of proprietary data? Can I diversify my distribution channels? All of these types of things. That is a luxury. It is an opportunity if
Yes.
you get to that point. But don't forget step one. Like don't get caught up thinking about step two when you're actually still on step one.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Don't let the infinite landscape of potential decisions cripple your ability to make a decision initially. That's an absolutely amazing point. I would like to ask you kind of a final closer question that I think is always interesting to hear. If you could get one message in front of every marketer and founder in the entire world, what would that be?
Holy cow, that's a big question.
Big responsibility here.
Get one message in front of every. This is such a big question. It warrants some thought.
Totally. That's why I like to ask it. It's really one of those things where like, here's a chance to put all of your eggs in one basket. What is that basket?
I think this is probably something for every professional, not just like a marketer, which is like I don't know what the right phrase. Don't be precious, or you can't be precious with any of your previous tasks. Going back to our earlier conversation, AI is this inevitable force, right? It's this inevitable rising tide. Any ounce of energy, like fighting it in shape or form, is just useless. It's 100% useless. So everybody, everybody spends their time debating these questions, like, is the product manager role, dead? Is engineering dead? Is design dead? Is marketing dead? Like whatever, like insert whatever role. Is X dead? It doesn't. Any energy, any time, any thought spent on those is just, it's wasted calories. And instead, 100% of it just needs to be spent towards figuring out what is possible, what you can do with these tools. Like you've got to ride the wave. Like otherwise, you're just like swimming against the riptide, and you're gonna end up drowning as a result. So just like let it loose, be free, let the riptide take you out into the waters and the ocean, kind of go with it. And I think it'll be, I think it'll be much more enjoyable though.
And in the worst case scenario, you will learn so much.
Well, I think what we often look, I think all of these roles are going to massively change. Don't get me wrong. Our
Absolutely.
titles might change, right? Like all that kind of stuff. It doesn't like the most successful people I never know started their careers as an associate PM and said, you know what, I want to be a chief product officer in 10 years, and here's my exact path to it. Like those types of plans never work anyways.
Yeah.
Like it's just like those straight paths. What people forget is that as AI gets better at doing something, that thing will commoditize. And when it becomes and when it commoditizes, that means companies or professionals can't earn from it, either like an individual, right? Like that there's like no personal or company level margin in it. And as a result, that competition forces both companies and individual professionals to seek out doing harder things, solving bigger problems, doing more unique things, right? And so the game, right, just keeps leveling up. it just keeps leveling up, and we keep finding newer, bigger, more new, unique to things to solve. Going back to my previous example, right? Like part of the reason the launch videos have become so popular is that they're way easier to create. They're much less expensive to create because AI is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. But as I said, it's like these things are going to fatigue, things are going to get boring. So one of two things is going to happen. Either people find a way to create even wilder, more interesting, more new, unique, right? Like videos, which is going to require more human ingenuity, right? And creativity and to come up with those ideas, because by definition, like AI is good at producing things that are in their training data. Their training data is based on past behavior, right? So new and unique things kind of aren't in their training data. And so like they have to do that, or they have to go to a totally new playing field, find some other kind of new, unique area to solve. And so like, this is happening at a micro level. It'll also happen at a macro level as well, which is why I say like, you just kind of have to roll, kind of roll with the riptide and look for kind of the newer, the bigger, more unique things to solve on. And as soon as AI is capable of doing something, you don't fight it. You just say, "Cool, I'm on to the next thing." Right? So that's a little bit of the mentality I've been trying to take.
No, I couldn't agree with that more, honestly. I think it's not only wise to do that, but I feel like it's just everybody's responsibility and something that they owe to themselves to continue experimenting, continue learning, continue playing around with it. But as we talked about earlier, don't forget the fundamentals, don't forget first principles. These things still apply. Brian, it has been an absolute pleasure. I've loved this chat. Where can folks find you if they want to follow along or learn more or just follow your journey in general?
Yeah, you can just visit my website, brianbalfour.com. I very sporadically blog right now, but typically when I put something out, it's because it's something that's burning in my head. It feels really important. So no promising publishing cadence on that, but I do publish there. Other than that, I am most active on LinkedIn. Always feel free to connect with me, DM me, whatever it is that you're most comfortable with. And so those are the two places. And then, if you're a product team, we have a bunch of AI native tools coming out of Reforge for product teams around customer feedback analysis, user research, prototyping, and a lot more. So would love for you all to check those out.
Huge, huge plus one for Reforge. It's been one of the most instrumental things to my career as a growth marketer personally. So highly recommend everybody check it out. And Brian, thank you again for coming on, having a chat, and thank you for everybody tuning in. And yeah, excited to see what the future holds. Maybe we'll revisit this discussion in a year or so and see what's happened since.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.